Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today we have Jonathan Goldhill, who's a business coach. And the question that, as Jonathan and I were getting started here, he asked about being on a branding podcast. So I'm going to go ahead and just kill that right now is that, yes, we are a branding podcast, but I love to talk about entrepreneurship. And one of the things that I've done since I started my business is I'm a big believer in coaching. I think that to have somebody help you along the way, somebody to bounce questions off and somebody to keep you accountable and motivated is key to the entrepreneurial process. And I think it's just good for everybody to have somebody in their corner that they can learn from. So with that, Jonathan, thank you and welcome to the podcast.
Mike, thanks for having me on the show. And obviously I'm a big believer in business coaching too. I've actually probably had about 20 of my own coaches, if you can believe it. Some people pick a coach and they stick with that coach through thick and thin. And I'm not one of those guys. I've had coaches that were good for a season, good for a reason, maybe, good for several years. Only a few really stand out. So I think it's really important. Everyone is thinking, and coaching is more popular now. Like I used to have to explain it 10 years ago, like, wait, what's a business coach? Now it's like more popular. Now it's tell me a little bit about you as a business coach and what you do that's different. And so it's really important to find the right fit, I think, these days, more so than ever now that people, like the consumer is more knowledgeable and aware.
Yeah. And just
coaching is.
Yep. But then just to dovetail into what you'd said there is that I'm in the same place. I'm on my third coach and I've probably interviewed and talked to, I don't know, maybe a dozen over the last 6-7 years. And this is not a shot at any previous coaches, but like you said, you have them for a season or potentially where you were at in the process, where your business was at, you potentially outgrew their sweet spot or what they're known for. And I've known that I needed one from the beginning and I wanted one because I'm a believer in it. But at the same time, I also pay attention to where I'm at in the process. And if I feel like I might be outgrowing this guy or this girl and I need to make that next move, that's part of the decision-making process of being an entrepreneur. And I think it's important to question, like you said, some people pick a coach and they're ride or die forever. And if that works for them and if that coach is keeping up with the evolution of their business, great. But for me, it just didn't work that way. So I've made a few changes over the years to get what I need out of it. And I think it's impacted my business greatly.
Yeah. And I'm going to correct myself. I think the people that I've known that have stuck with, and I call them coaches, but I'm now going to go back to, they were chairs of CEO peer groups like Vistage. And I've known of people who've been like in a group for over 15, maybe even 20 years. And so I guess that's a bit different because it's not just a facilitator chair that's coaching you. It's the whole group of 12 to 16 or 8 to 16 people that are giving you feedback.
Yeah. And I'll speak to my own experiences, but I've been involved with networking groups. I've done some masterminds. I would say collaborative peer groups that I bounce ideas off of, but I do only have one person that I would consider my coach, and that's the person that we do the weekly calls and we'll make sure we check in. But from a learning perspective, yeah, I surround myself, and I hope other people do as well, but surround myself with those people that can teach me things or I can teach them things or whatever it is to keep us all going the right direction.
Yeah. I once read a book many years ago by an author named Sheldon Kopp, which is irrelevant. The book was called If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. which is a pretty funny title. But what I took away from that book was that everyone can be a mentor and anyone can be a mentor to each other. And in some cases, so as a coach, I'm typically a mentor to my client, but I also learn things from my clients and I observe and watch their attitudes, their behaviors, or the things that they're doing that maybe I've forgotten that I should be doing myself or something. And so I think, look, we can all teach each other. It's just the question is how receptive you are. And I think that's the first rule of coachability is, are you receptive to learning?
Yeah. And I think that's a good point and pretty cool way to look at it because I'm in the same boat where I have clients that are behind me in the process. I have clients that are in the same place and I have clients that are way ahead of me in the process. And from an entrepreneur, just peer level, it's awesome to be able to watch them do the things they do and then be able to learn from them and vice versa. So it
Yeah.
is fun to, when you have that open mind, you can find opportunities and find relatability there in working with even clients on certain solutions. So even just to add this one thing, like we even share the different tools and apps and the different things that we're working on. I have clients all the time that ask me like, "Hey, Mike, what are you using for project management?" And
Yeah.
we're just sharing technologies. We're sharing, use this, don't use this. Here's why. This is what we experienced, and just those little things can save you time, money, and headache.
And I think that's like the one of the best uses of peers in your industry that aren't competing with you either in the niche or geography or wherever, but to ask them, like, what are you using for enterprise resource management? What software are you finding works best? I work with a lot of contractors, Mike, and I see contractors who maybe make the wrong decision with a software that's a like enterprise level software. It's going to help them manage their designing, estimating, bidding, job costing. And it's so difficult, as anyone knows, to onboard a new software, implement a new software program, and then to have to switch and do it again a couple years later when you find out it doesn't work well. That's when you turn to your peers and say, hey, what are you using? What's working? What's not? Hey, why not? It's great to have those relationships.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's talk a little bit about your coaching process. What does that look like? What is your approach to coaching, and what advice would you give somebody who is either A, in the coaching model at the moment, or B, has never had one and is thinking about getting one?
Yeah. Okay, good question. So I have, I guess, two coaching models. One is for teams and one is for individuals. Shall I start with the individuals, the one-on-one coaching maybe? Because
Yeah, that'd be fine.
sometimes yeah, that often evolves into coaching a team. So typically my one-on-one coaching is to smaller businesses that don't yet have a leadership team in place. Otherwise, they would probably ask me to get involved with their leadership team. And so, what that coaching process looks like, of course, it starts with I give them a whole lot of homework. And the homework is these are books that I've curated, and I suggest that you read that I think will really hit the nail on the head. And so, for instance, I took on a new client just about 2 weeks ago, and he's in a design and marketing and branding firm, and he's also got a firm just like it that is dealing with automotive dealerships. They're pretty different, right? One's just the local, deals with anyone who needs a branding or anything. And I told him, hey, you need to read a book called by John Warlow, which is a fable about someone who is starting an advertising agency and gets overwhelmed. And I won't go any further, but if you've read The E-Myth, then it's a book very much like that. And so my coaching process starts with, let's get you homework. Here's a whole bunch of homework, some of which is just, this is how the coaching process is going to work. And this is what I want you to watch in terms of how to fill out a coaching agenda and session preparation form. I want my clients to come to the meeting and not just show up, but a day before show up with, hey, these are my metrics that I'm tracking. These are the leading indicators. These are the lagging indicators. So you can know how we're doing either month to date or year to date. And this is what I want to get out of the coaching session. And this was the goals that I set from last time, because I want people, my clients, to be accountable for the stuff that they want to do. Because at the end of a session, we say, okay, what goals do you want to set between now and the next time we meet? And let's create the meeting rhythm around our coaching agenda or sessions. And so that filling out that form tells me whether or not a client is really leaning into this process as is engaged. And then the session, which is typically, I call it like a business therapy session because it's an hour long. It starts on time, ends on time, and typically, and it's used for focusing, it's used for accountability, and it's used for troubleshooting. So if you've got a problem that you're trying to address, I don't know, you have to have a difficult conversation with an employee, then during that coaching call, I might walk you through the model that I teach people on how to have a difficult conversation, and then I'll send them the tool. But meanwhile, we'll also then go through the agenda that they prepare. We'll look at their numbers. We'll talk about how are they doing so far? Or if they don't have the numbers, like what are they doing to get those numbers, to get them into place? You can't go into a doctor's office today without getting your blood pressure taken, your temperature, your weight. It's almost silly, but I'd like to think that I go a lot deeper on the vital factors than just those basic measurements. But it would be it would be not practicing business coaching if I didn't at least know what was going on from a measure standpoint.
Yeah.
And yeah, so then I don't have a strong curriculum based approach, but I do have certain things that I start with. And I do have one of my favorite tools, which is basically around like getting people into their genius zones and their zones of excellence and getting them out of the work that they don't like and may be good at, or don't like and are not good at. I want to get them out of those zones, and I want to get them working on what I call their vital few. And I want them to identify their trivial many. And this is basically the practice of the 80-20 principle. And literally, if that was the only tool in my toolkit, I could, if people were engaged with that tool, I could make a lot of progress with people. Because really, if you're going to grow, if you're going to scale yourself and your business, first of all, I have a lot of life coaching tools to scale yourself, but you need to scale yourself if you're going to scale your business too. I'm sure you agree.
Yep.
You have to work on your personal development, your energy, your priority. Like, what are you doing to show up and be fully engaged? But that one tool is so important because that allows you to delegate to people inside or outside of your business and to elevate yourself so you can work on more leadership or CEO stuff. So that's a little bit about my one-on-one process. Any questions?
No, so we're actually hitting on some very kind of similar topics between what we do, what Brand Retro is all about, and what you do. One of the things I always talk about on Brand Retro, and the purpose of this podcast is that we always want to remember why we started. We want to remember that feeling of excitement, the passion of when I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to like, there's things that happen within those initial phases that if you can capture those, put them in a bottle and take them with you along the way, along for the ride, you're going to always remember that feeling and you're going to have a much more fun experience in building your business and your process. So like you were talking about identifying the things that you like to do and focusing on those things, it's all part of that kind of that same ingredient for me is that I meet so many entrepreneurs and business owners that forget. They get 2, 3 years down the road and they're wearing way too many hats and they just forgot why they started. And by the time they come to me, they're like, "Hey, I need a rebrand or I need something." And I always take them back to why did you start your business? What was the reason why you kicked this whole thing off in the first place? Where did the name come from? And as much as I can peel back the layers of that onion to get to the true root of why they started in the first place, most of the time it's because they're unhappy because they got so far off the path. Entrepreneurship and all the tasks and the steps that go with it drug them off the path to the point where they didn't even like what they were doing anymore. So the challenge for me then is how do I get them back on the path?
Yeah.
I think what we're talking about for different perspectives is very similar. And I think it's important. And I think for me, that's one of the things that I identified is that to not go off the path, I'm going to bring a coach. I'm going to have somebody that helps keep me focused along the way. And then I also made the personal commitment that you talked about homework. I've made the personal commitment that, yeah, I'm going to come to all my coaching meetings ready, but I'm also going to, at least at minimum on an annual basis, I'm going to calibrate my own brand back to my why and try to figure out if I drifted throughout the year, if I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing and I should kill a service or we got to make sure that we're paying attention to what we want to do because that 80-20 rule, like you mentioned, if you're doing the right things, more good things will come from that versus doing the 20% of the wrong things.
Yeah. Or 80% of the wrong things,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
even worse. Yeah. So make some really good points and let me just amplify on it. So in my book, Disruptive, Successor, A Guide to Driving Growth in Your Family Business, which could be just a playbook for entrepreneurs as well. I put together a framework. It's called my 7-piece framework. And the first piece of that framework puzzle is your purpose, is knowing your why. And I think this is really important. In the book, Disruptive Successor, we're really talking about the successor finding their purpose. Because oftentimes, and I think the reader of that book is taking maybe over a family business that the mother or father started, and they were really a technician, and their purpose was just to put food on the table, a roof over their head, and if successful, maybe get a second home and take care of the kids. But now this entrepreneur, if they want to scale themselves, their brand, attract people to their company, be a destination employer, they have to have a much bigger purpose than just making a profit or making money or putting, food on the table. And so that why is so important. It's what really literally gets you and your employees out of bed every morning and gets them excited to come to work. And so I think that's a great exercise. And what we do is follow the model of the five whys, which it really dumbs it down to. If you had a 5-year-old, if anyone's ever raised, I think it's a 5-year-old. And at that age, they're always saying, why, Dad? Why do we do that? And then why do you do that, Dad? Oh, why does that matter, Dad? And so that's basically the process I use to getting at your purpose, to figure out, peel away and pull it all away, peel it down to the core and get to your why. So important. And then the third P in our playbook is around your product. A successor in a family business has got to look at the product or service that they're delivering and ask, is this still what customers want? Or how do they want it differently? How do they want it served up differently? And typically a millennial will come into a family business and will say, man, we're doing things like the really old school way. We need to put technology in. We need to put in processes. You have to put standard operating practices in place if you want other people to be able to follow the recipes. It can't all be in your head. Super important. And I think that the coach is taking a stand, or being a stand, maybe is the way you are, for who you want to be and how you want to show up and where you want to get to. And then the goal is to shorten the road to that end point or to that next point.
And I
It's not an end point.
right. And I think that's the part that I think is a invisible byproduct of having a coach, is that you will bump your head less, you will fail probably less, and when you do, you'll learn something from it, but you're giving yourself an opportunity to be coached along the way so that when the natural aspects of business happen, you've got somebody there to help you capitalize on the failure and learn something from it. Because the other thing, and you touched on it, was I think everybody who starts a business and tries to do what we're doing from an entrepreneur's standpoint is the idea that they have a unique idea. And when you take off down that entrepreneurial road, all the traditional noises on the side pulling you in different directions, you start to get pulled away from your uniqueness because you want results. So a lot of times uniqueness takes time, and the results of take time. So to remember your uniqueness and make sure that you don't lose that in the process is very important, because that's potentially could be your breakthrough item. That could be the thing that actually sets this up for you and makes it something that's very unique for you. Like you said, there might be old school ways that certain businesses are doing things that you don't want to get rid of, because over time you've become unique. You've become the only game in town that does that, and you want to own that as long as you can.
Yeah, I think it's really important from a strategic marketing standpoint to understand a few different things. One is, and I'll come back to it maybe later even, is who's your ideal client? Who's your ideal client profile, your avatar, and how do you serve that client better or different than anyone else? And then more towards the second part of that question, what makes you different? How do you stand out? What's your differentiation? And if you're just a Me Too product or brand, then why should someone choose you? How loyal would they be to you? People choose brands, I think, because there's a story behind that brand and they associate and identify it. And we could probably spend an hour over coffee or beer just yakking about different brands and the affiliation that people create with those brands, because they're the really good brands that really dominate their market stand out as being unique. They're not like everyone else's. And that's what's going to give them better pricing. in terms of margins. They're gonna have stronger profitability. They'll have better pricing. And if the brand is driven by having to have great customer service, then you're gonna have to do a lot of work on the inside to make sure that your people are trained to really be able to make decisions and be able to deliver what that brand is all about. So the experience is felt, right? I don't know, man, brands are just popping through my head. I can't even think as fast as like the pictures of the different brands that I admire and think are unique because of their difference.
And I think what people forget is that as much as we fall in love with brands and the relatability of, um, your brand is just as open to that opportunity as well. So if you create something unique, something authentic, and something that's relatable to your customers, they too could fall in love with your brand.
Yeah. Yeah. I once learned the quote many years ago that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And competitors might worry that people copy them. But if you're really innovative, then you don't worry about competitors copying you because you're already innovating one or two, three things down the line. And you're not, if someone's always copying you, they get known as they're the knockoff brand. And it's frustrating because they definitely will take some market share away from you because not everyone's an early adopter, or even if they're in the middle of the bell curve in terms of knowing about your brand. If they're at the tail end or the second half of that purchasing cycle, or if you call it that, they may be purchasing from your competitor who has a knockoff brand. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. If you're like me, you think about, as I look around my office and I think of printers, I think of Hewlett Packard because they're like, that's their niche. If I think of speakers, maybe I think of Bose, which is what I have on my desk. If I think of computers, PCs, I'm looking at a Dell or IBM, Lenovo. It's just like brands have a really strong association, and it's hard to think about buying second best because cheaper always isn't better. It's often just cheaper.
And I think the consistency of and the calibration process for brands is inherent in what we're talking about from a coaching aspect, because it was something that it's not that I couldn't trust myself with the responsibility, but I knew that if I was the only one keeping an eye on it, that it would eventually get backburnered because there's always too much stuff to do. So to bring a coach on or to bring somebody in the equation that can help keep me accountable was very important in that process. So as I aspire to chase the big brands and not even from a customer standpoint, but from a competition standpoint, I think it's that commitment to calibrating and making sure that I'm paying attention to my why that's going to get me there.
Yeah. So I think as people are listening to the show and they're thinking about coaching maybe and how it relates to them, or I'll share some of my observations. We can go back and forth on this. I
Sure.
think one observation is that oftentimes people want to know, what experience do you have in my industry? Because if no entrepreneur wants to spend a whole lot of time teaching a coach about their industry. They want their industry to be understood and or their positioning in the industry to be understood pretty easily. Now, a lot of businesses are not that hard to understand. They're not rocket science. So that may be less important. And what might be important is, does the coach have the tools, the knowledge, and the experience that is going to benefit you the most right now? And so I think of some of my team coaching clients that come to me because maybe they've read a book like Traction, the Entrepreneurial Operating Systems book, or they've read a book like maybe Scaling Up, why some companies make it or how some companies make it, why the rest don't. They'll come looking for someone who can deliver and implement a process or a program. Or I find some people read my book, Disruptive Successor, and they want to know, so how do I need some help with the transition from my dad to me as a successor? And I want someone to coach me. And I know when I wrote that book and developed that brand and that website, Disruptive Successor, that I would own those words in the marketplace, which I think is really important. Like brands want to own words in marketplaces, right? Like Volvo owns safety, like BMW owns ultimate driving machine or ultimate performance. And I'm sure you can riff on brands that own marketplaces, but what are the words that you own when you type in a Google search? So really important for your brand to have an identity and recognition. And I think that if you're struggling with that, a marketing coach, someone like yourself, or even a business coach can help you to start to identify who's that ideal client customer profile. What is it that you do that's different? And what are the attributes of your competitors versus yours? What are the points of differentiation if it's a highly commoditized market?
Yeah.
How do you stand out?
And I think what you'd said from the beginning is that you can change coaches. You can, depending on how your business evolves, you can wear different hats and have different people by your side. But I think the moral of the story is, or the lesson to be learned here, is that it's important to have somebody by your side, regardless of whether or not it's a mastermind group or a designated coach or whatever it is, because those outside perspectives and somebody that helps keep you in your path, so to speak, is really important. And it's one of those things that if you know that out of the gate, if you know that I'm coming into a scenario where I'm going to get pulled in a lot of different directions, I'm going to be wearing a lot of different hats. Law of averages is going to tell me that I'm probably going to go off the path. If I can't get back on that path on my own, it's good to have somebody with you.
Yeah, things go better with a coach.
They do.
I think Coke made up something like that. As I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm thinking like, gosh, if I go skiing or cycling, I want to go with a buddy and someone maybe if I want, who's going to maybe push me. If I go to the gym, which I'm loath to do, I want to go with a trainer because it's not where I want to get my exercise if I'm the guy who wants to be outdoors. So I'm indoors, I'm pushing weights. I want someone who's going to show me how to do it right, who's going to challenge me and know where I need to go next. And so things just go better when you have someone with you on the journey.
I couldn't agree more. Jonathan, where can they learn more about you, what you do, and get in contact with you? And then also you mentioned your book, Disruptive Successor. Tell us a little bit about that and how these people can find you.
Okay. So you can find me at my website, thegoldhillgroup.com. That's the easiest way. That'll tell you about my book. That'll tell you about, my coaching and coaching programs. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. My team and I should say, we're pretty active on LinkedIn. So at Jonathan Goldhill, if you want to just strike up a conversation and see what we've been posting, that's a great place. And then my website, thegoldhillgroup.com, will take you to my book. And Disruptive Successor is a story. It's a playbook with these 7 Ps, this framework, like an operating system to scale your company. And throughout the book, I do tell some client stories, and I follow one particular client who was a disruptive successor, taking over his dad's business. He and his brother were working with their dad and their mom. Dad's kind of fading to the background as one son has emerged as the CEO. And it follows a little bit of their story. They've been with me for 7 years, that family. I do team and leadership retreats with them. I do individual coaching with the leaders. And I'm really a confidant and advisor to the CEO. And it follows their 7-year trajectory from starting at about $1.5 million to they're hitting about 14 million this year. So it's a great growth story. It's a model for the type of client that I want to attract into my life. And I think it's a good read. It's got action steps at the end of each chapter with tools you can download so you can get your virtual coach through the book if you like.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to learn more about CyberDogs, share your thoughts, or even ask a specific question about this episode and/or the brand retro mindset, contact me directly at mike@cyberdogsmarketing.com.